Rubbing Salt in the Wounds by Davy Threes. Pass the salt, Sam. I stared despondently at my father as he chomped on the large chicken wing he was eating. I couldn't help but feel sorry for the poor chicken that had been chosen to represent the food he ate, even if it was already dead. There was a river of slimy brown sauce slowly dripping down his arm, forming a small, dark puddle on the sleeves of his rolled up shirt. Saliva and sauce that he'd actually managed to get into his mouth sloshed like a whirlwind of dirty water at the corner of his lips when he took another bite. He was terrifying when he ate. He gave his food no mercy, but even worse, he had no manners. He chewed like a brain-dead horse, and after every bite, made an awful slurping noise where he hoovered up the remains of food that had become stuck in his teeth. This happened almost every dinner time, but it had recently been getting worse and generally summed up my father's entire demeanor. He was overweight, lazy, and a general scumbag. Just last week, he had killed a cat that lived in our street because it pissed on one of our plants. And the worst thing was that he had only discovered it because he wanted to smoke outside to get away from us. Naturally, he blamed us for his actions. He claimed that if we weren't such assholes, he could have smoked inside and let the whole incident pass, which we accepted under duress. At first, I was actually hoping that he would get in trouble with the police, but the cat was only a stray, and nobody filed any complaints or notices. But this kind of stuff sums up my dad perfectly. He acts like that all the time, and it leaves me, my mum, and sister Bobby to pick up the pieces. Sam, pass the fucking salt. I regained my composure, my mind still filled with the image of my dad stamping on a feline, piss spraying all over his face. I scanned the dinner table, desperately trying to locate the salt pot before he screamed at me again. Ketchup, Hellmann's, peppercorns, shit, salt. Salt, where's the salt? I leaned across the table, pushing aside Bobby's glass of water in case it was hidden behind it. But before even checking properly, noticed that she was staring directly at the floor. Bobby was only 7 years old, and it was heartbreaking to see her so frightened in the comfort of her own home. She was looking straight down, her food completely untouched, and appeared to be fiddling with her small brown teddy bear, Spud. It wasn't clear whether she was crying or not, but she was clearly trying to avoid any kind of eye contact with our father. Hey, I whispered to her. She solemnly looked up. Her cheeks were a flush of dark pink. She sniffled twice and barely managed a half-hearted smile in my direction. I knew it wasn't genuine, but I smiled back. How's Spud? He's okay, she said, smiling, and lifted him onto the table. I couldn't help but think the second smile was a lot more real. That's great. Hi, Spud, I said, mimicking a goofy wave in its direction. Bobby looked at Spud, back at me, then back at Spud. A tear promptly formed in the corner of her light blue eyes. I think he's scared. Are you fucking deaf? What is wrong with you people? Bellowed my dad from the other end of the table. He sat directly staring at me, like a raging Spanish bull, complete with steam funneling from his ears. I can't see it. Mom, where's Dad's salt? My mom sat motionlessly in her seat, staring at the wall on the other side of the room, sipping on her glass of wine. This had become common for her the last couple of years, with respect to dealing with my dad. She used to ward him off, protecting us from his violent outburst. But nowadays, I feel like she's implicitly passed that responsibility to me just because I'm 16. I feel like she's given up, and it terrifies me to think that I am his new first choice, his new target. Mom, I ushered with a little more volume than before. Yes, sweetheart, she replied, still staring at the wall, not once breaking eye contact. Where is Dad's salt? Oh, sorry, she said, reaching behind her. Her outstretched body soon returned to normal form, and she reappeared with his salt pot in her hand. Here, she said softly, placing it in front of Dad. It was accompanied by the most obvious fake smile I had ever seen, and I'd seen a lot of them. For God's sake, woman, ever think of putting the salt on the table where it belongs? He said in a scathing tone as he poured a small white mountain onto his fries. His wide but sinister eyes carefully inspected the chicken. My mom ignored him. You know, too much salt is bad for you, I said sternly. Shut it, he shouted. Remnants of chicken skin, spit, and salt dripped from his mouth as he spoke. I'll eat as much damn salt as I damn well please. But you have it with every meal, every single day. You've got your own salt pot, for Christ's sake. Don't you think that's a little weird? Most food already has too much salt in it as it is. Do you know how dangerous it is? I shouted back, overwhelmed with anger. He was so selfish and redundantly unconcerned with his own health, let alone his family's. Sam, whispered my mom, don't worry about it. I slumped back in my seat and watched in silence as he lashed at the last few wings. I need a beer. The salt tastes like shit, by the way. It always has. He finally said as he lifted his plate up into the air, licking it clean. Once finished, he thrusted it back into the table, stood up, and left without saying a thing. I imagined he would be retreating back to the living room to hog the TV for the rest of the evening. My mom looked at me and smiled. Nice one, she said. He's so easy to rumble. You'll be a pro like me one day. I hope not, I said with a smirk, diverting my attention back to Bobby. She was still holding Spud attentively in one hand, but lifted up her free hand, pushing her index finger up high into the air. Mom put her wine down on the table and did the same thing. I smiled and lifted my index finger up to my ear, so I didn't have to move my elbow, which was firmly resting on the table. Each of us considered this our small signal of safety. Every time my dad left the room, whether he had been an ass or not, we each had to raise our index finger to indicate that we were feeling okay. If you didn't display the index finger, you had to explain to the other two how you were feeling. You had to let it all out, and it was the remaining people's duty to make you feel better. My mom smiled at us and blew us both a kiss. Okay, thanks my loves. And you, she said, rushing over to Bobby. I think it's bedtime for you. And she lifted her high up into the air, causing her to break out in a fit of gurgling laughter. Seeing Bobby giggle made me smile more than anything in the world. Sam, you wouldn't mind washing up, would you, while I take Bobby up? Sure thing. Night, Mom. Night, Bobs, I said with a smile, and proceeded to stack the plates and move them to the sink. As I was washing up, the sound of the running tap was topped by the sound of my dad laughing hysterically at the television from the other room. I sighed to myself and ignored it, but after a solid minute, it felt like the laughter was never going to stop. I slowly turned off the tap, which made the laughter much clearer, and crept over to the living room door. It was firmly shut, but there was a small hole in the door where there used to be a keyhole from long before we moved in. I knelt down to the floor, making sure to make as little noise as possible, and could see my dad slumped across the couch with a beer in hand. He was watching some show with the words XXX Babes highlighted at the top of the screen, and I caught a short clip of a young lady in skimpy underwear laying across her bed, rubbing her nipples. "You fucking bastard," I accidentally said out loud. Just then, the laughter instantly ceased, and he slowly twisted his head towards the door. I wasn't sure if he knew I was there, or if he had heard me. In fact, I wasn't sure if he knew anything at that moment. His physical appearance had been declining the last couple of weeks, but today was the worst to date. His pupils were obnoxiously dilated, and it looked like he was drooling, and he would not take his eyes off the door. I sat and stared at him for at least 20 seconds, and he didn't move once. His eyes remained glued to the door, his large, brown pupils locked in my direction. "Dad?" I muttered. "Everything okay?" Suddenly, he jumped back. "What?" he mumbled, before violently throwing up all over the carpet. I jumped backwards myself, before turning and running to find Mom. I let Mom deal with the aftermath. I'm glad I did, because it seemed like she took control of the situation quite well. I kept myself occupied with the rest of the washing up while they spoke in the living room. Dad's voice was rather quiet and relaxed, which was surprising considering the circumstances, but I didn't question it. Once I had dried up the last blade, I knelt down and looked through the small keyhole again. Mom was on her hands and knees, scrubbing the carpet, while Dad sat on the sofa, slowly rocking from side to side. "Mom, would you like any help?" I murmured, leaning my head against the door. "No, sweetie, go up to bed. I'll leave your lunch money on the table tomorrow." Reluctantly, I retreated upstairs without argument, before getting ready for bed myself. I slowly knocked on Bobby's door, before entering immediately after, because I knew how much it annoyed her. "Hey!" she yelped, sitting up in bed, as if she was lying awake, eagerly awaiting me. "You know you're meant to wait for me to say, 'Come in'?" "Of course," I agreed, "but I thought I could cheat, as you'd be asleep." She giggled, and collapsed backwards, landing on her tower of pillows. "Well, good night, Bobs. I'll see you at breakfast." "Good night." I pulled the door to, but just as I was about to close it, she spoke again. "Sam," she paused. "Why is Daddy so mean?" "He's not he's just got a bad temper, is all, Bobs. Just don't worry about him. We're all used to it by now. Just remember, you always have me and Mom. If you want to talk about anything, we're always here for you. Okay? Love you." "Love you too." At school the next day, I couldn't get the mental image of my dad out of my head. The way he had looked at me was deeply unsettling. Those eyes, those dead eyes, and the way his jaw just hung open, like a still, dead fish. I was just glad that Bobby hadn't been there to see it. I didn't see Dad until later that evening, at dinner. When he finally did stumble into the kitchen, I was almost finished. Dinner had been so calm without Dad's presence, and the three of us were actually enjoying ourselves. So as he limped through the doorframe, his presence naturally put everybody in a bad mood again. But today, something was different. He didn't come over to us. He didn't come over to us shouting. He didn't complain about what Mom had prepared. He just stopped in the doorframe and stared at us. His pupils were even bigger and more bloodshot than last night. Any more pressure and they would have popped out of his head. They were large, black circles underneath them, as though he hadn't managed a wink of sleep the night before. And his shoulder twitched intermittently. He ended up standing there for 10 to 12 seconds, like a hyper-realistic wax sculpture, before he calmly walked over and sat at his seat, without opening his mouth once. "Dad?" I muttered quietly. When he said nothing, I diverted my attention back to Mom, but she just shrugged and continued sipping her wine. Dad proceeded to ignore me and instantly lunged for the salt, pouring half the contents all over his meatballs. As dinner progressed, me and Bobby sat and stared at him in mutual disgust. He never particularly cared about his appearance, but he was beginning to look more and more tired every day, and today was beginning to feel like breaking point. He looked like literal death. When he had finished, he got up and left the room. Not a word was muttered by my father in the hour he was with us. He simply got up and left. "Maybe he's evolving," Mom said with a hint of sarcasm, but honestly, she looked just as exhausted. "Is he okay?" I asked, knowing he wasn't, but I felt helpless. "He's fine. It's just a phase. Bobster, bedtime for you." We lifted our fingers into the air. Before the two of them disappeared from the room, leaving me alone. The silence was welcoming. Everything was becoming too much. Dad's strange mood swings and Mom's do-as-you-will attitude felt like they were slowly eating away at me. I thought back to Bobby again, her innocent blue eyes, the soft blonde ringlets that looped ferociously among one another atop her head, her sweet pink cheeks. She didn't deserve to grow up in this environment. I sat and thought about her for a few minutes before retreating back upstairs, where it was equally as quiet. Mom was tucking Bobby in, and I imagined Dad had gone back to his bedroom. His door was in fact shut, so I went back to Bobby's room and popped my head in, but almost collided with Mom as I entered. "Hey Sam, tuck Bob's in, will you? I need to go and take the bins out," she said, and with that, quickly disappeared down the stairs. I looked over at Bobby. She was tucked under the covers, so much so that you could barely see the bottom half of her face. "Bobster the lobster, how was school today?" I said with a smirk. "Fine," she said with a smile. "Good. You gonna make tomorrow even better?" I asked, making my way over to her. "Yeah," she said. Just then, her cheerful expression changed. "Sam, what's Daddy doing?" "I already told you, Bobs. He's always been like..." "No. What's he doing?" Her pale blue eyes sparkled in the darkness, but were glued to the open door frame. As I turned, it felt as though time had gone into slow motion. A large figure was stood in the doorframe, a sharp object glistening in his right hand. His face, illuminated only by the light in the hallway, was one of a lunatic. His eyes were rattling from side to side, up and down. He had a wide smile plastered across his face, displaying a bright set of teeth. He muttered one thing before running at me like a bolt. "Salt!" I managed to dive out of the way of his onslaught, but quickly realized I wasn't his target. He stopped and paused when he reached Bobby. He made a large grunting sound, but didn't actually say anything as he caressed her small blonde ringlets with the blade. Tears were trickling down her face, but her eyes were squeezed shut. Without even thinking, I yanked the hairdryer from the wall and thrusted it over his head. He yelped, and his body slumped forward, collapsing on the bed. Bobby quickly slithered out from underneath the covers and retreated to her safe place, my thigh, which she squeezed with a firm grip. A kitchen knife hit the carpet with a loud thud, with a soft thud, and the hairdryer slipped out of my hands soon after, clattering onto the floor below. Blood trickled out of my father's greasy head of hair, congregating in a small red puddle on Bobby's pillow. "Lock yourself in the bathroom," I yelled, and threw myself down the stairs. "Mom," I screamed. I burst into the kitchen to find Mom dancing around the kitchen in her headphones. She didn't notice me at first, and continued to pour the contents of a small brown bag into Dad's salt pot. Small white crystals slowly filtered from the bag, landing among the small pile of salt that remained in the pot. "Mom?" I said softly, to which she jumped backwards and turned to face me. It suddenly all made sense. Dad's need for salt and his increasingly erratic behavior. Mom's nonchalant attitude. I stared at her, and there were tears streaming from her eyes as she opened her mouth to speak. "I just wanted him gone. I just wa- I wanted us to be happy. You and Bobby deserve so much better." Ha, how long? How long have you been doing this? He could have killed you. He almost killed us. "A few days. I figured since he eats so much salt, he wouldn't notice. I I just wanted him to overdose. I wanted him out of our lives. Sam, please," she said. The small brown bag was shaking in her hand. I couldn't comprehend what I was hearing. "He almost killed us," I repeated with a feeling of anger I never once thought I could direct at my mother. She didn't reply. She just stood in that spot and stared at me with tired, broken eyes. "What is it, Mom?" I could barely speak. "Bath salts," she sobbed. Her whole body was shaking. My head began to feel hot, and I felt dizzy. My hands felt warm and clammy, and as the room began to spin, I left her and ran back up to Bobby's room. She had remained glued to the spot I had left her. She was still staring at my dad's still body, which lay crumpled on the mattress. "I love you," I said as I moved towards her and knelt to the floor. "I love you so much." She launched herself at me and sobbed emphatically onto my shoulder. Oh my god." Mom appeared at the doorframe. Her expression was devoid of any emotion, but she screamed at the top of her lungs. "Sam, Bobby, I don't know what to say. This wasn't supposed to happen." We both sat in silence, remaining in embrace. "Mommy, what happened?" Bobby blubbed in between tears. Again, she didn't speak. She simply knelt down beside us and hugged us both. For the first time ever, I actually felt safe in my own home. I looked at my blubbering mess of a mother, shook my head, and lifted Bobby's face. "Hey, you know how Dad really liked salt? You need to tell the nice people that come tonight, okay? Make sure to tell them how he had salt all the time, and remember how terrible he was to us. You need to tell them that he tried to kill you." She nodded, tears still trickling down her face. I looked at my mom, then back at Bobby. This isn't our fault. He deserved everything he got. I stared at my dad's lifeless, bloody body and lifted my index finger high in the air. Bobby and Mom did the same. We all knew this time that it was for real. A new beginning. we were actually safe, and there was no need to explain ourselves. Hey, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please be sure to click on the video on the screen. Also, if you feel like it, please like this video and subscribe to my channel so I can grow it and continue to provide you with high quality content. If you want to stay updated with my work, check out my socials in the description and feel free to reach out with ideas, suggestions, or just to say hello. I'll see you guys next time. Stay safe, and most importantly, keep traveling down the dark path.